Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we have a test subject we have seen in several videos in the past. This is a 2010 Outback 2.5i Premium with about 177,000 miles, 176, somewhere along those lines. In the past with this vehicle we've replaced the driver front wheel bearing hub assembly. We've put a torque converter in it. We've done a valve body as far as I recollect. I think we did a valve body on this one. And we've done brakes, the screwy rear brake caliper. That was this car. So in today's video, we're going to be doing another wheel bearing assembly, this time on the passenger front. And I know a lot of you are like, well, Mr. Subaru, we don't much care to watch you do wheel bearing hub assemblies on Subarus because you live in the rust-free South and you just unbolt them and they fall out. Well, not so much. So this car spent some of its life up north and it has gotten some rust built up on it. If you recall back to that video, I'll link up here in the top corner of doing that driver's side wheel bearing. It took a while for me to beat that thing out of this car. In today's video, we're going to look at a new tool that I have picked up and been recommended by some of you northern techs, the ATD hub shocker, that should make getting that hub out of this car a much easier task. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it and get this bad wheel bearing hub assembly replaced. All right, guys, first things first, we're gonna go ahead and jack up the vehicle and support it on a jack stand. Always want to make sure the car is nice and secure before working on it. Go shake it on the jack stands, make sure it's not going to move, make sure the jack stand isn't uneven and everything is safe before getting underneath of it. All right, guys, first things first, we need to go ahead and get the wheel and tire off. 19 millimeter, of course. Now that that's out of the way, we need to go ahead and get our caliper and caliper bracket out of the way and our brake rotor. Now we're going to remove the caliper and caliper bracket as an assembly by removing the two 17 millimeter headed bolts at the back of the caliper bracket here, and we will just hang it off of the strut here. We do need to remove a 12 millimeter bolt here just out of camera view that holds the brake line in place, so you have enough slack on the brake line to pull this up and out of the way. So 12 millimeter hold down bolt. Get that out of the way. Brake line is now free. Then our two 17 millimeter headed bolts here for the caliper bracket. One and two. And swing all of this up and off just like so. Put our brake hanger hook there and hook it on our spring there. Make sure our brake line is not contacting anything or it doesn't get any damage. Hopefully your brake rotor will pull off, but if you're in the north, likely it won't. You'll have to beat that off. Just had this off a month or so ago doing the brakes, so this should come off fairly easily. The 12 millimeter hold down bolt for the brake line threads right into the rotor, and you can use that to pull the rotor off the hub if you don't live in the Rust Belt. So now that we got that out of the way, we're nearly home. We need to get the CV axle nut off, which that is a 32 millimeter. Just like so. And then we've got four hub assembly bolts that, if I recall correctly, are 14 millimeter headed. So we got to get those four bolts out And then, as I said, if you live in the rust-free South like I do, it just falls out in your hands, and it's a very quick and easy job. But if you live in the North or the Rust Belt, that thing is going to take a lot of heat and a lot of beating, but hopefully our hub shocker will help make that quick work. So these 4 14mm headed bolts are located around the CV axle, and they are not particularly easy to get at. One suggestion would be to pull the axle out of the hub/spindle by either removing the 2 strut to spindle bolts here, 19mm, and you know, swinging this assembly forward and pulling the axle back and then getting on them. That'd be much easier. Or you can take the ball joint free and pry down the control arm and pull the spindle forward and pop the CV axle out that way. Now, given that I've looked at this really quickly, and it looks like there's some corrosion and some damage to the heads of these bolts, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and remove the CV axle before removing these bolts. It just makes it easier to get at and less likely that we'll round off or strip out or, you know, damage the heads of these bolts and have a higher probability of getting them out and back in one piece. You know, I forgot to mention this. There's a 12mm headed bolt here for the ABS wheel speed sensor. You want to take that out as well, just to keep from possibly damaging that sensor. Quick correction, that was a 10mm headed bolt, not a 12 here for the ABS wheel speed sensor. I'm just going to carefully pry it out. These things can get kind of stuck in here from corrosion and rust. Just take your time and hopefully won't break it off. Pops out like that. Then you got a little plastic clip here. Just push the ears in, like so. And you can just tuck that up into the strut and out of the way as well. So what I'm electing to do is to go ahead and take loose the strut bolts here between the strut and the spindle and just pull this forward, pop the axle out, bolt it back together after we've taken those bolts out so we can beat on this thing. Hopefully it comes out pretty easily, but we will see. Now, this top bolt is an eccentric bolt, which means it has a cam on it for your camber adjustment. So you will want to mark that bolt head relative to the strut so you can realign it so you don't affect your alignment on your front end. Now we've got the axle pulled out, we can actually access those bolts much easier. We don't actually have to pull it all the way out, just to save a little bit of time. There's one of our bolts out. Number 2 out. Number 3 out. And number 4 out. Now, of course, as predicted, this hub assembly is not just going to fall out in my hand, because this was a Rust Belt car in a previous life before it wound up here in South Carolina. So as I said before, we're gonna temporarily install and tighten our strut bolts just to hold this stable so we can put our hub shocker on there and wail on that hub and hopefully knock it right out of there. Hopefully making our new purchase of a tool worthwhile. All right, so all 4 of our hub mounting bolts are out. CV axle is not bolted in, nuts off, it's loose. So the only thing holding us in here is corrosion. So let's go ahead and get this hub shocker mounted up. All right, guys, so the hub shocker tool is mounted up. All you really got to do is bolt it to 2 of these studs there on the hub bearing assembly and get you a big old hammer and start wailing on this reinforced part of the plate, and it should pop out relatively easy considering the old methods of trying to beat it out with an air hammer or trying to pry it out or trying to beat it out from the backside of the spindle. Just a lot easier. So let's see if it lives up to the claims and what all the northern mechanics swear by. All right, guys, let's see how much force it actually takes to knock this hub assembly out of here. Looks like it's already starting to separate, so it's not too stuck, it doesn't seem like. Looks like we're starting to get loose. And look at there. Already freed up, and I didn't even hit it that hard. I'm not even out of breath or anything. That is so much easier than the last time. Again, I'll link it up there in the top of the video. Just go look how hard and how long it took me beating on that thing to get it out on the driver's side. And this has been in for like 2 years longer than the driver's side was when I fought it for so long. So guys, pretty insane how easily that came loose with this hub shocker tool. I just can't get over it. It's just so much easier than the other methods that are out there. I really wish I'd bought one of these years and years ago. So we'll go ahead and get the tool off. It's going in my toolbox. Love it. So we've got our whole hub assembly here. Let's take a listen to it. Not sure if that's picking up on camera, but it's really chunky sounding. So what we need to do is knock the brake backer plate off of there, get the new hub assembly out, and we're gonna take a wire brush and we're gonna clean the rust out of the spindle in here, get all that mess knocked out of there because it is kind of crusty in there. First, we'll go ahead and take the strut bolts back out. Just get all the rust and corrosion up out of there. Now getting that brake backer off of there without destroying it's going to be a task because it is good and seized up on this wheel bearing hub assembly. There we go. Just punch it off. Let's see if we can pick up the noise now on the microphone. Not sure if that's going to come through or not. All right, so got our brake backer, our brand new shiny wheel hub bearing assembly. So guys, the wheel bearing hub assembly for this 2010 Outback is a 28373 AG01A. I might go ahead and take this tie rod loose just so we can fully remove the CV axle and get it out of the way, although you really don't have to. All right, I went ahead and took the tie rod loose just so we can get the CV axle completely out of here. Just make it easier to line this up, make it easier to torque these hub bolts properly. Go ahead and knock the corrosion off of the backing plate. Good idea to take some just flat black Rust-Oleum paint and hit it so it'll try to limit the amount of corrosion and rot. All right, so a little bit of Rust-Oleum paint on there just to try to stop that from corroding any further. Get that, the new hub assembly. And get everything lined up. All right, guys, now we've got the new hub bearing assembly in there. We've got the backer plate on there. Just tightening down these 14mm headed bolts. Tighten them down evenly to pull the hub into the spindle. Our final torque specification for this will be 65 Newton meters, or right at 48 foot-pounds. All right, got all the bolts snugged up evenly. Pull that hub into the spindle. Again, final torque 65 Newton meters or 48 foot-pounds. Alrighty, we are set there. Hub assembly is in. Torque specification. We can go ahead and put the CV axle back in, put the tie rod back in, torque that nut, new cotter pin, and get this show on the road. All right, guys, so we've got our hub bearing properly torqued, 65 Newton meters on the 4 14mm headed bolts. I got the outer tie rod torque back down with a new cotter pin. You can barely see it there. I believe the spec is 27 or 29 Newton meters on that. Our strut bolts up here are torqued back down to specification. Put that on the screen. Now, what we need to do is install a new CV axle nut. And that will be torqued down to 220 Newton meters and staked in place. Now, we're not going to do it right now. We need the brakes on to do that. Very important here. You do not want to put the vehicle down, put weight on the vehicle, and then torque this nut. This nut has to be torqued because that nut's torque preloads this wheel bearing. And if you don't torque it before putting weight on it, you can tear up that new wheel and hub bearing we just spent so much time replacing. So make sure you do that properly. So right now, what we need to do is take our ABS wheel speed sensor, route that back down, put it back in its spot back here in the spindle. And we'll clip our connector, harness connector right there. The little 10mm headed bolt, torque specification on that if you are torquing it, which not everything with a torque spec needs to be torqued to that spec. Some stuff you can use your better judgment on. That torque spec is 7.5 Newton meters. So ABS wheel speed sensor is back in place. Now all we have really to do is put our brakes back on. Shot of brake parts cleaner on the rotors just in case I got any contamination on there. Slide that back up in place. Now we'll swing our brake caliper bracket and caliper and pads, all that as assembly, back onto the rotor and install the two 17mm headed bolts. I believe torque specification on these bolts is 120 Newton meters. All right, now that all that's tightened up, we can go ahead and put our 12mm headed bolt back in place to hold our brake line to our strut. Our brake shield here did get a little bit tweaked, a little bent up. So just go around and make sure it's not contacting the brake rotor, as that's gonna give you some scraping and grinding noises. That's gonna drive you crazy. So make sure there's no contact there. Now, once that's done, you can take an old screwdriver or something like that and jam it between the vents in the brake rotor and the brake caliper to lock that all in place. That way, when you go to final torque, put the final torque on that CV axle nut, it will stay there and let you tighten it instead of rotating that assembly. So as I said before, 220 Newton meters is our torque spec. Always easier to push down than pull up when torquing something. And there we go, 220 Newton meters. And we can take a chisel and stake that outer lip into the notch in the axle, just a mechanical lock to make sure that nut doesn't come loose. So take our hammer and our chisel, like I said, and just fold that over into that notch, just to make a mechanical lock where that nut will not back off. All right, guys, all that's left now is to install the wheel and torque our lugs. 120 Newton meters. And guys, that does it for the video. Hopefully this helps out some of you guys up north and some of you guys in the Rust Belt that have those rusty wheel hub assemblies. Try the hub shocker. That thing is a game changer for getting out these stuck hubs. Link will be in the description below. Also, we'll be putting it in my Amazon storefront. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.